Good day, everyone. For today, we are going to talk about taking charge of one's health in understanding the self. And we're going to discuss various factors to consider when taking care of yourself, particularly of your mental health, in order for us to be able to raise awareness and in order for you to be able to develop strategies in order for you to cope with stress. So let us begin. Before we proceed with our discussion, let me start by talking about and trying to answer these guide questions. The first guide question is, can stress mold character? Okay, and maybe you've heard of people who have been through adversity. You have heard of people who had the most stressful life experiences. You have heard of people who were able to conquer various life experiences, and without those experiences, they wouldn't be where they are right now. Okay, so I do believe that although stress is something that is defined negatively, being able to conquer stress and being able to cope with it and being able to become a better person out of a stressful experience is very helpful in molding a resilient personality. Okay, and a lot of negative events may happen to you. Okay, and it's important for us mental health professionals to assist people into developing coping skills and to develop greater acceptance with what happened with their life. And we don't focus on the negativity of the event, but rather we focus on the positive things or the positive what did you learn from the event that happened to you. Okay, that's why there are people in my college thesis. I remember we surveyed people with disabilities, and they said that they are actually more thankful that they acquired the disability because their disability allows them to be able to be more appreciative of what's happening around them because they think of it as their second life. And without that experience, perhaps they won't be that grateful with their life. So that's how I can say that stress can mold character. However, stress can mold us in a different way. There are people who may not be able to cope with stress. That's why they resort to other coping mechanisms that are not prescribed by mental health professionals. That's why there are people who cope with stress, for example, with gambling or with drugs, with substances, okay? Which is not healthy after all. That's why we need to correct the way that you handle stress so that we mold the right character with the right values. So how do Filipinos deal with stress sourced from the social and political environment? And I would say that this is not something unique to the Filipino community, but resilience is a universal resource. Okay, it is something that all of us will be able to develop eventually. That's why we are being trained to be more patient and to be more optimistic, but we do not endorse toxic positivity. So what we want to learn is that we Filipinos are very resilient, but we don't want to demonstrate toxic positivity. Meaning we don't want Filipinos to close their eyes on the negative things happening around them. We don't want Filipinos to force themselves to feel happy. Okay, because here in the Philippines, you will be praised if you are smiling in the midst of adversity. Okay, however, one danger of such behavior is that if you're forcing yourself to be happy, because I know that there are people who are really happy, but if you're forcing yourself to be happy in the midst of adversity, then that may not be the right emotion for that. Okay? It's also important to know that emotions are triggered by certain events, and it is normal for you to display a certain emotion to a certain event. Okay, and we don't want people to force themselves to feel happy just because they want to look like they are resilient. Okay, but rather we want people to be able to process their emotion and for them to be able to understand what it means and for them to develop great or helpful coping skills. Now, before we look at some coping skills that I want you to learn, first I want you to understand that not all types of stress are bad. Okay? When we say stress, it's not something that should be viewed as something negative all the time because like what I told you earlier, stress molds character. Okay? And whenever you feel stress, I want you to be aware which type of stress am I feeling right now. Okay? Because there are two major types of stress, eustress and distress. When we say eustress, that is a positive kind of stress. And when we say distress, that's a negative type of stress. In order for you to understand what that means, look at the picture on the lower right side of our slide. So at first, when you don't feel any kind of stress, then you are calm. Sometimes you are bored. That's why you look for something to do. Then eventually, you will get excited. But when you are now doing what you have to do, you start to feel the stress. Okay, and the first kind of stress that you feel is perhaps eustress. And when you feel eustress, you are being challenged, you feel focused, and you feel energized. Like what I told you in our other discussion about goal setting, we have the tendency to look for a new goal and to set higher goals as we continue to challenge ourselves, particularly if we have a growth mindset. However, we should be careful as parents, as teachers, as mentors that we don't set very, very difficult goals because eventually prolonged exposure to stress will result to what we call distress. And when you are now distressed, you feel fatigue, exhaustion, and burnout. So our goal is for us to challenge your capabilities, for you to feel focused and for you to be energized in what you do, but we don't want you to feel burnout. Okay? And there are a lot of people at work who feel burnout, and I guess that is also true in schooling. When we say that you're feeling burnout, you're no longer happy with what you do. In the case of those who work, they no longer want to go to work. They don't find any meaning with their work. And they only want to when they go to work, they only want the day to end so that they can rest. Because they have been exposed to stress for an extended period of time. What I want you to know is that it is healthy to keep an optimal level of stress, and that should be in the eustress instead of distress. Okay? And from time to time, you also need to calm down and just to relax and compose yourself in order for you to physically and psychologically recover for the next set of challenges um, that you're going to face and overcome eventually. Okay, so before we look at the various coping mechanisms that I want you to learn, I want to clarify that stress is not the same with trauma. Okay? Because as a mental health professional, this is very important for me. I always hear people using stress and trauma interchangeably. However, we shouldn't do that because stress is not the same with trauma. Okay? And we don't want people to label their experience as trauma when in fact it's just stress. Okay? There are people who would say that if they had a hard time going to work or going to school, they've been traumatized. However, that's not trauma, but rather that's stress. We don't want to change the definition of trauma. We don't want to misguide people about the meaning of trauma. Okay, we want to be responsible in using these words. Okay, let me define it. Stress is just a natural reaction. It can be physical or psychological reaction to a stressor. When we say a stressor, these are the things that trigger stress. Okay, stressors can be good or bad. It can make you cope in a positive way, or it can make you engage in bad coping behavior. Say, for example, a type of stressor can be failing in an exam, being anxious in your work, okay, or difficulties in the family or in a relationship, financial problems, and even life transition is also an example of a stressor. For example, it is also considered that graduating from college or being married, they're also considered as possible stressors because there are people who may have difficulties in adjusting to their new life after these life transitions. Hence, maybe they need some professional help when it comes to learning important coping skills. Okay? So if things go out of hand, if you experience stress and then you lack the right coping skills to deal with them, it wouldn't hurt to seek professional help. Okay? And that's where we are going to come in. Okay? But on the other hand, when we say trauma, this is something that is far greater compared to stress, and you don't want to experience trauma because this is something that may result to a lot of psychological disturbances. Okay, and you can only say that someone has been traumatized if he or she experienced either one of these three or perhaps all of them. Okay, so let's take a look at them. These are serious physical injury, death or near-death experience, or sexual violation. Hence, the only people who can label their experience as traumatizing are those who have been into war, those who almost died, those who were almost killed, those who had a near-death accident, those who were almost raped or those who were raped, those who were molested. So they really experience trauma, and because of that experience, they may develop a psychological disorder. Okay, and it's important for us to identify these individuals because it's hard to cope with such stressors, okay, with such traumatizing experiences. And we need to refer them to mental health professionals because what if they develop anxiety or depression symptoms after the event? Okay, and we don't want that to happen. I am taking part in a research right now, and the research topic is about online sexual abuse and exploitation of children. A lot of them has been exposed to a traumatizing experience, and because of that, we, they need to seek professional help. They need counseling or they need psychotherapy. However, not all parents are aware that they experience a psychological trauma. That's why they are not referring them to a professional. That's why it's very important to educate people about psychological stressors and psychological trauma so that the right interventions can be given. Okay? Now let's talk about stress. Okay, I'm not going to discuss about trauma anymore in this slide. That's for another day. I want to focus more on stress and how we can help people cope with stress. And this picture is borrowed from the internet, and it's very helpful in explaining stress to everyone. Okay, so look at this. Experiencing stress is just like filling up a pail or a bucket of water. Then, with more stress that you experience, then the more that you reach the limit. Okay, so what are the various types of stressors that we have? These can be environmental, for example, problems with your housemates. It can be academic, especially for students, and it can also be interpersonal. Okay, and there are more types of stressors that are not included here in this slide, and it would be healthy if you were going to identify them in your mind right now. Okay, so if our mind or our body is like a bucket being filled with stress, then how can we decrease the level of stress, or in this image, the level of water? Okay, that's the our illustration for stress. How can we reduce it? So look at these. There are faucets down here and at the bottom, and their label is coping skills. Hence, if you have the right coping skills, then you'll be able to maintain a healthy level of stress. You don't want to be highly stressed, because if you're highly stressed, then your psychological well-being is at risk. However, the more stress we experience, sometimes we feel that our coping mechanisms doesn't work. That's why there are people who resort to what we call unhealthy coping. Okay, however, unlike healthy coping, imagine this. If you use unhealthy coping, just imagine that this faucet goes back, transports water back into the pail. So you just feel that you're feeling better, but in reality, you're not. Okay, you're just giving birth to more problems. For example, because of family problems, you resort to drugs or you resort to gambling. You just feel happy when you gamble. However, what if you now have gambling problems? Okay, you feel happy at first, but you don't realize that things are getting out of hand. Okay, so we want people to engage in coping mechanisms, but not unhealthy, but rather healthy coping skills. And why is it that we want to maintain a healthy level of stress? Okay, see this limit right here. Okay, if we reach this limit, then we may not know anymore how are we going to handle the situation. Perhaps you're going to feel that you're no longer in control. In some illustrations, they would say that if you reach this certain limit here, then you are at risk of developing psychological disorder or mental illness. Hence, we don't want people to be exposed to highly stressful situations, because that may be the trigger to a certain mental health problem. Okay? And just remember, when things go out of hand and if you feel as if your coping mechanisms are no longer working, it's time to it's time to seek psychological help. Okay? And there's nothing negative in doing so. Okay? It's not something unhealthy, but rather it's a healthy way for you to feel better. Okay? It's psychological help is not something that will make you, it's not only for those with mental illness, but rather psychological intervention ideally is for everyone. If you seek psychological help, it doesn't mean that you automatically have a mental disorder. Okay, so now let's proceed. Here are some examples of coping, and some of them may be negative. Okay, so I borrowed this another picture from the internet. For example, what if there are people who engage in smoking? Okay, in a bad way. I know that for some, smoking is part of their day-to-day lives. However, what if you become a chain smoker because of your stress? Okay, some would engage in sexual behaviors, some would isolate themselves, some would binge eat. There are a lot of examples here. Some would go for excessive online shopping, some would go drinking or take drugs. Okay, some would even sleep for more than 13 hours a day. Okay, that's why one recommendation is that you must have a trusted buddy or a friend who's going to check on you every now and then. Okay, and in case that you become aware that your friend is engaging in such disruptive behaviors, then perhaps it's time to tell that friend that his or her coping skills are not working and he or she is in need to develop better or healthier coping mechanisms. According to one theory, here is how we handle stress, or here are the two steps in stress response. The first step is what we call primary appraisal, or in primary appraisal, what we do is that we figure out the event. So what is happening? Is there something dangerous? Is there something threatening? Do I need to do something immediately? Okay, is this something that, what should be my response? Fight or flight or freeze? Okay, when we say fight, then you're going to fight back. For example, you can fight with stressors such as, for example, stress in schools. You choose to fight back by studying harder, or that can literally be fighting back. For example, what if the stressor is that there's an animal chasing you? So that's a part of primary appraisal. Or you can also do flight. When we say flight, that may be avoiding the the negative situation. Or freeze. That's why some people, when you when a criminal is pointing a gun at them, their immediate response is neither fight or flight, but rather they freeze. Okay, so we appraise the event. So what does this mean? Okay, is this positive or negative, threatening, dangerous, or is it safe? Then if it's stressful, if it's dangerous, if it's fear provoking or anxiety provoking, we do a secondary appraisal. Or what we do in secondary appraisal is that we assess the resources to handle the stressor. And when we say resources, guys, this refers to your characteristics that will help you handle stress. Okay, so now think about it. What are your personal characteristics that you know will be helpful if you are going to feel stress? I know I have resilient students out there. I know there are students out there who are going to say that they openly talk to their friends. Okay, and right now what I'm going to show is that here's a good list of personal resources that I want you to be aware of. These are resilience. Efficacy. Remember our discussion about goal setting? Are you efficacious? Do you feel that you can do it? Okay, do you believe in yourself? And we also have grit. When we say grit, that is about being persevering, being determined. Okay, that is very important both in school and at work. Remember, it's not intelligence that predicts success, but rather it's grit. Also, we have gratitude. What if you're feeling financial stress? Or what if all you do is count your problems all day? Then you might benefit from a gratitude activity. Remember one of the stories I shared to you before? I had a professor who taught his kids how to pray at night by engaging in a gratitude prayer. So what is it that you're thankful for, and say it to God? Okay? And also we have hope. Okay? Hope is related to optimism. Okay? Having a positive outlook in life and the growth mindset. So here are just some of the resources that you can have. Okay, or the character strengths. Okay, according to positive psychology, or another theory in psychology, so there's also what we call psychological capital. Okay, we can have financial capital, different kinds of capital, but here in psychology there is such thing as psychological capital, and the four that are considered to be the four psychological capital are hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism, also known as hero. What they are saying is that if schools and if companies will invest in mental health, then a lot of good things will happen. So if you can invest on money, if you can invest on machinery, you can invest on materials, you can also invest in psychological health. Okay, so here are some things that characterizes a stressor. So what makes it a stressor? The first one is the unpredictability of the event. For example, death in the family or death of someone close to you is something that is not predictable. Hence, it is a stressor. Okay, it is something that you did not expect to happen. Other than that, these stressors may also be intense. Okay, that something that you not did not expect to be that big. For example, accidents or disasters, these are intense events. Other than that, some stressors are not controllable. It is not beyond, it's not within your control, but rather it's beyond your control. Okay, um, for example, disasters are not something that we control, and sometimes we feel that we fail to protect our loved ones, but in reality, we cannot have predicted something like that, and it is not something that we can control ahead of time. And other than that, these stressors cause different types of pressure, and we are pressured, and we don't know how to react to these situations. But remember that these stressors will result to certain emotions, and remember that negative emotions are normal responses to abnormal events, and don't feel bad for feeling that way during these events, because it is normal to feel sad. It is normal to feel bad, but you need to be able to manage those emotions so that these emotions will not turn into unhealthy emotions, or these emotions will not cause disturbances in areas of functioning such as school, work, relationships, etc. So you need to be conscious about these emotions, and you need to know that these are temporary emotions and eventually they will pass, and you need to make use of your personal resources in order for you to cope. Okay, so don't feel bad if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling disappointed, because these are normal responses to abnormal events. Okay, so here are some various signs of stress. First is emotional. Okay, person may be anxious or apathetic. When we say apathy or apathetic, the person doesn't show interest in things. He doesn't have any plans. It seems like he doesn't care. He's not doing that because he doesn't really care, but rather the person is apathetic because he or she is highly stressed. So you must understand his or her circumstances, okay, and understanding the emotions that the person is displaying, or he may be irritable or fatigued mentally. Other than that, behavioral signs include avoidance, self-destructive behaviors or self-harming behaviors, self-neglect, meaning it is evident that the person is no longer taking care of himself or herself, and they exhibit poor judgment. They may be impulsive, or they don't think about what they're doing. Okay, so it's important to calm them down first, okay, and let them take their time, provide them water, food if they need to do so, if they need so, or let them rest for a while. And physically they might be ill, okay, because of the stress that they're feeling, or exhausted, or they may be self-medicating, and then you will discover that in the first place it is the medicines that this person is taking is not prescribed to him. That's why he is self-medicating or abusing or overusing medicines. And there may also be physical or ailments complaints. So psychological stress will not only manifest psychologically, but it will also be evident physically. And be aware of these various red flags, okay, in order for you to identify someone as stressed. So what you can do when you feel stressed, or what can you how can you help your friends who are stressed? So the first is that what you can do is ask the person to slow down and just to relax, and to try some breathing exercises, just to breathe in and to breathe out in certain situations, and help the person relax, because like what I told you in our previous discussion, if you are emotionally unstable, then you're more likely um, to make bad decisions. Other than that, you can also help the person organize and prioritize. Like if the person has a lot of problems, then which of these can we deal with first? How can we organize these problems? Okay, how can we what should we prioritize? Okay, and in the long run, okay, this is not an immediate answer, but something that you should be doing for quite some time. You need to live a healthy life physically and mentally. And believe it or not, physical exercise also improves mental health, especially for those who isolate themselves in their room. If you want them to feel better, or you want to help them recover, perhaps it's helpful to join them in exercising, or just to ask them to go outside for a walk if they're willing to do so, okay, because that's helpful. Other than that, they should also recognize and accept limitations. So know the limitations of your capabilities and do not set outrageous goals. Do not set goals that are beyond your control. Okay, so um do not blame yourselves for things that you don't have control over with. So do not stress yourself too much that there are people that you cannot help, okay, because this is beyond your control. You don't know their circumstances. What's important is for you to do little things that are within your control. Okay, and these smaller goals will eventually help you realize that even though you're performing little things, in the long run, that's already a lot. Okay, and when if you need more help, then there's nothing wrong with seeking social support. It's important to identify the source of social support. Okay, so if that's a psychological concern, then you need a mental health professional. If that is a spiritual concern, then you need the help from clergy. Okay, you need the help from ministers. Okay, and you need to seek help from professionals and not from quack doctors or from people who are not trained with what they're doing. Okay, and lastly, you need to write it down. Journaling really helps, and it allows you to realize that there are behaviors that you do that you didn't want to do in the first place. If you write them down, then you will be conscious that there are things that you don't want to do anymore, and journaling will allow you to keep track if you are living a healthy life. Okay, so let me share with you some hobbies that you can pursue. Okay, it just depends which of them would be doable in your situation. So that can be reading, drawing, music, movie, etc. Okay, other than that, you can go for running, going for a walk, visiting a park, swimming, okay, calling a friend, hanging out with friends, contacting family members, okay, and that can also be helping a neighbor, okay, helping out your friends, okay, so basically doing things that make you feel better, okay, doing things instead of isolating yourself. You do things that can make you feel better by helping others, or feel better about yourself because you have done something productive, instead of engaging in unhealthy coping behaviors such as gambling or using drugs or other risky behaviors that we don't want you to engage in. Okay, so one more thing that I want you to learn from this discussion is that certain events trigger emotions because of our thoughts, and you don't want your thoughts to hinder, or you don't want your thoughts to lead to negative emotions. That's why sometimes it's not the event itself that causes the bad emotion, but rather it's the thought. Okay, so you need to be conscious. How do I think in certain situations so that I can avoid negative emotions in a healthy way? Okay, because there are instances wherein it's healthy to feel negative emotions. So look at this. For example, if you get stuck in traffic and then you think that you're going to be late, then that will cause anxiety. But if you think that but if you think that, why do I always get stuck behind stupid drivers? That's already beyond your control. Okay? And that causes frustration. So you see, the way that person A thinks in comparison to person B makes them experience different emotions. Look at person C. I have a good excuse for missing the boring meeting. So let's just forget that he said the boring meeting, but rather, how can we say this in a healthier way? For example, in a healthier way, you can say this as, um, it is understandable if I will be late because I got stuck in traffic, and this doesn't happen every day. This only happened today because there's a construction and no one was informed about this. And that will give you an emotion of relief. Okay, so different events result in different emotions, but not directly, but rather they are processed first at the mind, and what we think affects the way we feel. Okay, so try to think in a healthy manner so that the emotions that you feel will be healthy as well. Okay, so here are some examples of how do we change unhelpful thoughts? For example, when you fail, then you would say it's unfair, okay? And that makes you feel angry. And sometimes anger is healthy. However, being vengeful or seeking revenge is not. Okay? So we don't want to experience too much anger to the point that we want to be vengeful to others. That's why we try to change the thoughts. Instead of saying it's unfair, we could say something like this could have happened to anyone, but this time it just happened to me. And sometimes bad things happen to good people. And because of those thinking, you would feel realistic, you will be more understanding, that's accepting, and be more reasonable. Other than that, there are instances wherein we say that it's their fault this happened, and we become angry, frustrated, vengeful. We accuse others and we don't trust others anymore. So we don't want to engage in the blame game. So we help the person realize blaming doesn't change the situation, or others may be to blame, but I need to focus on myself and my family. And that makes you more accepting and more hopeful. You see, the way that you see things or the way that you think will help you feel better. Okay, so don't engage in behaviors that are and don't engage in thinking that will make you engage in negative behavior. So do not self-harm, do not think that the world hates you, or do not think that this is happening because of you. Okay? Let's look at some other examples. For example, a person may say, I should be coping better. Why am I still stuck in here? So that makes you feel helpless. However, we can rephrase that as, the fact that I got here today proves that I'm coping a bit. Okay, and talking to a counselor helps me feel better. And most people would have trouble after an event like this, so it's completely normal to feel like this. So that makes you feel more hopeful. Other than that, instead of saying my reactions mean I am going crazy, or saying that something must really be wrong with me, we can change that into these reactions are temporary, and most people will feel this way after a disaster, and that will make you feel reassured and capable. Other than that, you may think that only weak people react the way I do, or other people are dealing with this better than I do, then you might feel worthless. That's why we want to change the way you think by saying that most people react this way for a while, and my reaction reflects how big this event was, not how weak I am. Okay, and because of that, you will feel stronger. Okay, so I want you to use these techniques that I told you about. I want you. So at the end of the day, it's our thoughts that make us feel better or make us feel worse. Okay, and do not try to control everything, because there are things that are really beyond your control, and do not make a person feel bad for experiencing a negative emotion, but rather um, show empathy, show compassion, and be more understanding. And as a closing message in this discussion about mental health and taking care of the self, I want you to remember that do not self diagnose, do not self medicate, and seek professional help. All right, so that is it for this discussion. I hope that you learned a lot, and I hope that you spread these learnings to other people, especially those um, who are going to need more tips, more strategies in handling stressful situations. So thank you for listening in this discussion. I hope you learned a lot from this discussion as well as in this course. So that's it, and thank you.